Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to our second panel of the day, Pivoting to Support the Role of Corporations in Supporting Grassroots Efforts for Innovation. Again, my name is Dorothy Jones-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of Nation of Makers, which is a support organization, sort of like an association for maker organizations, and we support through community building, resource sharing, and advocacy. And today I'm joined by several leaders within corporations who have been partnering with Nation of Makers and their local maker spaces and maker organizations to have a tremendous impact in their local communities and across the United States. So I want to start by inviting our speakers today to briefly introduce yourself and your company and to give a 3-minute or so overview of the work you've engaged in during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so because it's always awkward, right, like on these virtual things to know like who's next, let's go in order of, let's go Matt, Mara, Audrey, and then Toni and Chris. And so if you could speak just a little bit to who you are, what you're doing in brief, we'll get into the deeper stuff in a little bit. So thank you.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Matt Stultz. I am head of community for Prusa Research. We are one of the top 3D printing manufacturers in the world. And we have been concentrating a lot on creating some of the top designs that you're seeing out there for face shields. Oh, maybe have one right here, just thought about it. Yeah, if you've seen these face shields, our company released the designs for them. We've also been organizing people together to help manufacture these face shields locally all around the world and getting them the resources that they need. And just keep pushing on with making more, as many of them as we can.
Awesome, thank you, Matt. Mara, do you want to tell us what you're up to in Los Angeles?
Yes, my name is Mara Hitner, and I am the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Matter Hackers. Hopefully many of you know Matter Hackers. We are a 3D printing retailer, digital manufacturing retailer, I should say. So if you go to matterhackers.com, we've got desktop 3D printers, laser cutters, CNC, vacuum formers, and all sorts of materials. I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the chat for COVID response. We started what's called the Maker Response Hub, and it was a website where makers could go and register if they were interested and had 3D printers to make face shields and ear savers, and also where hospitals could register their need. We are a hospital, we need 600 face shields or what have you. So we amassed over 5,000 volunteers across the country. Many of you were those volunteers. Thank you so much. You made such a difference. And what was interesting to me is that with those 5,000 volunteers, we had over 14,000 3D printers across the country that were printing visors for face shields. And then they sent those visors to Matter Hackers. We boxed them up and sent them where they needed to go. The Maker Response Hub is still alive and well. We're starting to look at other, thank you, Yuri. We're starting to look at other ways that makers can make a difference, whether that is with educators who need tactile models for people who are visually impaired, students who are visually impaired, or other needs as they come up. So thank you so much for all of your help.
Thank you, Mara. So our next person is Audrey, who is in Towson, Maryland. Can you let us know what's going on? I know, right, actually you're right now probably in Baltimore at home, right? But you're usually in Towson, Maryland. Can you let us know what you guys are up to at Stanley Black & Decker?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Audrey Castle. I work for Stanley Black & Decker. As you know, we are a large tool company. We own hopefully some of your favorite brands, DeWalt, Craftsman, Lennox, Irwin, Stanley Black & Decker, obviously. But a lot of people don't know we also own security and healthcare businesses. So we do a lot of touchless door technology as well as technology that goes into our healthcare institutions. And some of the cool stuff that we've been doing around COVID is partnering with other corporations like Ford and 3M, and we were actually able to provide up to 200,000 PAPR devices that use our 20-volt DeWalt battery technology. And that was a cool partnership that hopefully we get to talk a little bit more about later on. We've also done a lot of stuff around 3D printing and engaging our communities as well as our employees to print some of the lovely Prusa prototypes that you've seen that Matt was showing, and kind of just empowering our employees as well as the communities that our employees are in to engage with the maker community and give back to their communities via maker technologies.
And we'll be talking a little bit more about that shortly, because I really do want to talk about how we enable. Obviously, the employee is also a member of the community, right? So how do we empower that sort of innovation and transfer of knowledge and just participation in overall innovation ecosystems within a particular community? But we'll get to that in a second. So next we have Toni Stuller and why am I forgetting Chris's last name? Kristopher Floyd from Accenture. And so they're both actually in two different locations for Accenture. Toni is usually located in Illinois, although she's joining us from her vacation today. Thank you for taking time off your vacation. And then Kristopher is in the Bay Area in California. And so can you both share with us a little bit about what Accenture is doing as it relates to COVID, and just a little bit about what you're up to these days?
Sure. I'll go first. As Dorothy said, my name is Toni Stuller, and I'm a consulting analyst with Accenture, normally in Chicago, Illinois, hiding on a social distance vacation here in the northern woods of Michigan. And I'm the creator and program manager for Accenture's Innovation Incubator PPE initiative. Just to quickly share a bit of how our Grassroots initiative came into existence, it began when I posted a question on an internal channel back in March asking how we could respond to COVID. In true Accenture fashion, my post was met with an explosion of ideas and enthusiasm. The next morning, around 120 Accenture employees across the globe participated in a design thinking call, filled out a survey on how they'd like to volunteer, volunteered to help me lead efforts, and then continued to recruit. By day 3, we had over 300 volunteers spanning 19 countries and 23 US states. At this point, Accenture leadership, we had captured their attention, and that led to securing our North America CFO, Steve Stone, as an executive sponsor, and then the creation of an innovation incubator, which was formed to bring all of Accenture's COVID-19 efforts under one umbrella for visibility and enablement. Our initiative has now grown to over 430 volunteers and counting in 24 countries and 99 cities worldwide. With guidance from Accenture Legal and Leadership, our initiative has partnered with Nation of Makers, and we're currently in the process of connecting our US volunteers to 5 Nation of Makers affiliated makerspaces: ACE Makerspace in Oakland, California, TXRX Labs in Houston, Decatur Makers in Atlanta, Georgia, the Illinois PPE Network out of DePaul University in Chicago, and Make Haven in New Haven, Connecticut. Accenture is also going to be providing a financial donation, which will be split among those 5 regional makerspaces. Under the direction of these makerspaces, our volunteers will not only be making and distributing PPE, but also lending their other very talents to the spaces, helping with logistics, project management, etc. We discovered, talking to the spaces, that this connection could not have come at a better time. Obviously, the rate of COVID infection across the US has never been higher. The need for PPE is once again getting desperate, not only in medical facilities, but in our communities. And the maker spaces have told us their volunteers are burned out from months of working 24/7 to put out PPE. In some cases, they're running low on supplies and fundings and are in need of both financial and human resources. Because of this, we are also working with Accenture's corporate citizenship practice and have stood up an ongoing internal to Accenture volunteer event so we can continue to provide volunteers beyond That's where the accounting comes in. And then as well as an internal and external fundraising campaign with hopes to continue to provide resources to our partnered makerspaces. So that's just a little bit of a brief overview of our initiative, and I'll let Chris go ahead and introduce himself and things that he's been doing as well.
It's a hard act to follow, Toni. Yeah, so this is first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for having us on this panel. We're humbled to be here. This is an awesome community that has really risen to the occasion during this pandemic. So my name is Kristopher Floyd. I lead the Innovation Showcase program at Accenture's flagship innovation hub here in San Francisco. So I'm aligned to our applied R&D practice, which means I work very closely with our top researchers to showcase their work. And my strategic focus is on the development of new partnerships and business opportunities between our R&D teams and leading industry clients. So things like rapid prototyping, design, innovation really fall into our wheelhouse. When I noticed some of our labbers and makers prototyping face shields, I mean, literally the day after shelter in place began, it's pretty funny. We had employees like running into the hubs, like stealing the 3D printers, taking them home and printing out some of those prototypes, Matt, that you provided. So thank you for that. But saw that happening, saw Toni and what she was doing in the social innovation group, gathering volunteers. And then I also scanned the larger innovation ecosystem, looking to learn how others were addressing this problem, what folks were doing. And after a few weeks of navigating some admittedly uncertain waters, we ended up getting in touch with Deborah and Nation of Makers. And that's really what we're about at Accenture. We have over 30 co-research partners just in the R&D practice alone. And as a firm, we're proud to co-innovate with a client portfolio of 3/4 of the Fortune Global 500, 92 of the Fortune Global 100. And now we're honored to welcome Nation of Makers as our newest corporate citizenship partner. So I'm happy to be here and thank you all.
Thank you all for those lovely introductions. So I want to say I'm going to ask a few questions of everyone, but I do want to encourage our audience to put their questions into the chat, and then our wonderful technical producer will help me navigate those so that I can ask them to our great panelists. But one of the first questions I wanted to ask is, in your day-to-day, before and beyond COVID, a lot of your corporations played an important role in supporting the local innovation ecosystem. And in particular, I know all of you have actually done work in this way, but Audrey and Mara, I know that each of your organizations in particular is doing work in partnerships with your communities to have impacts on education for youth and adults alike. And so I'd love for you to speak to that, especially now. I know later on in the day we actually have an education panel, but I think that there's a tremendous need for communities to come up with solutions as it relates to education and how education can be more engaging, more inclusive, and I think some of the work that you both are doing is really helping it to do those things. So I would love for you to each speak a little bit on that. So I don't know who wants to go first. Audrey, do you want to go first? You're first in my view here.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that some. So even years before COVID, right, which honestly seems like decades ago now, we as a corporation had put in place some corporate social responsibility pillars. And one of those pillars is to empower 10 million makers by the year 2030, right? And that's a big number, right? And so there's lots of ways we can get to that number. And part of that is through partnering with educational partners like Discovery Education to create STEM education for specifically middle schoolers and high schoolers to get them interested in STEM careers, and also to help address some of the issues we see in our customer base, right? There's a huge trades gap going on, a skilled trades gap here in the US and even abroad, right? We're a global company. We've got 50 manufacturing sites in the US, but we've got 150 worldwide. And this is a huge issue that we see. And so for us to be able to say and take the initiative to put these things in place to help empower not only makers internally, but makers of the future, right? Getting kids interested in STEM and STEAM education at a young age. We've donated entire maker spaces to schools who didn't have a maker space, and now they do. And it's fully outfitted with, state-of-the-art tools and equipment, even stuff that we don't make, like laser cutters and 3D printers, right? So we really love the DIY and enthusiasm and the just everything, all the passion that makers can bring to their communities. And we see that, and we we actively want to empower it. And you know, this is something that continues through COVID with our internal maker initiatives and our external maker initiatives. You know, we're continuing to empower those people with our tools, with our products, but also just our support and our networks and leveraging those connections that we have.
Thank you. And Mara, I know that you actually shared with me when we were talking this really this amazing partnership that you have with some local schools, in particular certain populations of students that may not, you know, as we evolve to this online education world that we're in, you know, to cope with COVID and to make sure that we're all remaining safe, there's some needs that are evolving, especially to make sure that we're able to be equitable and inclusive and serve all students. And I don't know if you just would want to share with us a little bit about what you're doing in education, and particularly that example, because I think it's just a really wonderful example of how a corporation can make a difference in education.
Sure. Well, just a background. I mean, I think one of the things that corporations can bring is perspective. And for Matter Hackers, you know, we have many different kinds of clients, people that are buying from us: education, schools, maker spaces, community colleges. This is always been a core part of our business. And so what we've been doing always before COVID is really listening to teachers and listening to these spaces and trying to provide the right guidance, the right videos, the right products, services to be able to have them train the next generation of workforce. Because that's really what it's about. Like we're all going to need to hire people, and we're going to need to hire people that are using digital fabrication, and that involves all of the STEM education. So we've always been involved in kind of empowering educators to be able to take 3D printers, laser cutters, vacuum formers, and all different kinds of materials and use those for digital manufacturing learning, use those for STEM learning. With COVID, it's actually, I think it's almost, I mean, there's, you know, it's terrible, it's a pandemic. But if we were to look for some silver linings, being able to go virtual and having to figure out how to make digital manufacturing education and STEM learning virtual has been really interesting. We've been hearing from teachers that they've been able to, for example, buy some low-cost 3D printers, the ones that are, you know, $200-300 kits, and actually send them to their engineering students, for example, so that they can continue to do their CAD lessons online and actually have machines there to fabricate them. The other thing I think that that Dorothy is referring to is when using the Maker Response Hub, we now have, like I mentioned, these 5,000 volunteers across the country, and they all have such specialized and amazing knowledge, diverse people of color, women, people from all over literally all over the world, that have so much knowledge to share. And so we have connections with schools in the States, but also organizations like Boys and Girls Club, Girl Scouts, and students, teachers that are working with visually impaired students. And we're really looking at ways that we can use online learning and distance learning and, you know, Zoom meetings and things like that to bring more people that have this specialized knowledge to classrooms that maybe they wouldn't have been able to fly to before. So, you know, guest speakers and that sort of thing. We're also looking at using Maker Response Hub to actually have our volunteers produce models for teachers of the visually impaired, where, you know, maybe before they needed one model for, you know, tactile learning models like fractions and things like that. Maybe before they needed one copy of that model for their entire classroom, but now that everybody is at home, they need a number of copies of that model, and not everybody has a 3D printer. So we're looking at ways to not only make knowledge like people on screens more available and more equitable, but actually have, you know, use this distributed, localized manufacturing model that we've found with 3D printing PPE across the country, and looking at how we might be able to provide those kinds of services at no charge for educators.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And really that speaks to the next thing I wanted to highlight, which is that COVID's really transformed our entire society and changed how we all kind of do business and engage with one another. And I think, one of the ways is that, we act more as a community. And I think, to your point, if there was a silver lining, it would be that we finally learned how to work together in a much more efficient way. And I think, one of the things that the crisis highlighted as it relates to Prusa, Matt, is that you guys had a groups feature, and that groups feature, I think, expanded in sort of its utility. So can you talk a little bit about the lessons you learned at Prusa from this time of COVID, and how your company is engaging with the maker community, and how that's kind of expanded through the groups feature, but then also some of the other things that you're doing to engage community? Because I think as we engage community, to what Mara was saying there, we see all these ways that beyond COVID, we can actually work together to solve some of our problems and some of the challenges that we're seeing, not only as we evolve ourselves, but just in general, and how we can work together more efficiently. So Matt, can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we created a site that we refer to as Prusa Printers. Prusa Printers is a file sharing site for people to access all different kinds of designs. So if you want to download that face shield I was showing earlier, it is freely available for download on Prusa Printers, but other people can make their own designs and upload them there as well. And it already was becoming a community in and of itself of people sharing all these ideas and these designs. But we wanted a better way for them to kind of concentrate in on things. And we were already working on some things pre-COVID for like physical meetups and groups and things like that I was going around and kicking off and hosting around the United States. But we quickly saw, okay, with COVID, people need easy places where they can geographically come together, find people, and work on things in a closed system. And so we kind of took some of the things that we were already working on and quickly made some changes to them and created this group specifically when COVID was going on, or first kind of ramping up. But we didn't want to make it entirely COVID specific, because COVID is, the way we are seeing it is, obviously a horrible thing, but it's also a chance to learn and lessons and a preparation for things in the future that hopefully won't be anywhere near this bad, but you just don't know. So localized, emergency response could go into something like groups and communicate with it within small regional areas to find other things that might need to be made when a disaster might hit a specific area, or again, another kind of global situation. So it really is finding ways that people can more easily communicate with each other, because social media becomes, kind of a mess of too many topics and too many things, and finding ways that we can bring these communities together and really focus around specific topics really does help keep the community together. We take some of the politics arguing and bickering out of things that, we find on other social media platforms, and just instead say, hey, this is a group about nothing but printing face masks. Let's get the job done and leave everything else aside. And it really helps.
I think that's an interesting point, because I think, obviously it's important to focus on difference, right? And, that is a unique part of who we are. The story and the framing that we bring to a specific problem comes from the identity and the background that we have and the way that we see the world. But I think there also is a niceness of coming together as a collective, and not necessarily erasing that individuality, but celebrating it and bringing it together, and focusing on a common problem, and really honing in on, okay, what are the solutions that I can bring? What's the perspective that my community can bring? And I think one example of this that, I know came up was when everyone was making masks at first, and the hand sewn masks were, one of the first types of masks that were being made en masse by makers around the country. The community that was hard of hearing and deaf really stepped forward and said, well, how will this work for us? And really came up with some solutions, and those solutions went viral, and the makers were really like, okay, wow, we didn't see it from that perspective, but really honed in on kind of like, oh, that's a solution, that's something that we need to solve. That's a problem that we need to solve. And I think that, as we come come together, part of that coming together is also figuring out what all those problems are that we're not even identifying because it's maybe not in our vantage point. It doesn't mean that we're awful people. It just means that we tend to see the world very individualistically, unfortunately. And so sometimes we're only focused on what we see and we don't necessarily even see all the problems. And so bringing everybody together also allows us to see all the problems so that we can come up with all the solutions. And I think that's really, really powerful.
Well, and I saw someone in the same thing. I saw someone actually use Yuri, and I think this kind of sums up a lot of the makers in general. He says that his projects often start with a tool looking for a project, and I've kind of been saying through this entire thing that I really feel like makers have been we've been ramping up and waiting for this opportunity. We are constantly trying to find ways to fix and solve our world, and suddenly there was this giant problem that everyone was able to just jump on, and we've been in training, we've been in spring training for this for years, and now suddenly COVID came around and everyone was like, okay, we got this, let's do it. And so
100%. And I think, and the testament of what we can do is really remarkable. And I think everybody still is like, whoa, aren't those the people that, are making 3D printed Yodas? And it's like, yeah, it turns out we can make 3D printed Yodas, and we also can make 3D printed face shields, right? And we can also do other types of making, and we can also bring our perspective and our design knowledge and, the breadth of people that responded, everyone from, I saw elementary school kids who were either, in the Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts or Brownie troops or, just, getting started, just saw something on the news and wanted to help, all the way to what we call our maker pros, right? So people that are like yourselves in corporations, people that have engineering backgrounds or, high-tech backgrounds of different sorts coming together and having meaningful dialogue, right? And everyone's voice was kind of heard. And it's not to be super, poetic. I'm sure there were problems, right, in the world. There were probably some conflicts. But overall, I was pretty astounded with, how willing everybody was to work with one another. And in particular, I think one other thing, that happened in particular with corporations is that corporations were able to partner and in some cases pivot, right, from what they were already doing. So in large case, you were amplifying the work that the existing work you're doing, at least this particular panel. But there were other corporations who are not necessarily represented here, who just said, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing. The number of upholstery people that contacted Nation of Makers and said, can you give me a design? I want to make masks. I want to make gowns. I have, all of these tools and equipment, but I'm not really sure how to use them for this other purpose. Please help me pivot. And I think that there was this really exceptional dialogue that we don't normally see, right? Like there's this, common, we agree, we're related to one another, but we're not always communicating across the vast, vastness between, the gulf between what we call, hobbyist makers and maker pros. And, I think what happened through this is that we all had something to give and everybody wanted to work together. And so you saw this switch of power and process, and the way that things normally happen were not happening and still aren't really happening in the same way. And so it just gave this tremendous opportunity to just respond in this really, really responsive way. Audrey, I saw you took your mute off, so I want to get your comment there.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the partnership that we were able to do with Ford and 3M to make these PAPR devices was really just speaks exactly to that, Dorothy. We, the passion that each of the individual companies had, but then also acknowledging that, our supply chains are broken. We don't have the prowess or the know-how or the regulations to make healthcare devices, right? What can we do to make this turn around so quickly, right? And we came from literally a napkin sketch idea over the weekend, but from Ford to Stanley to, by the end of the week, putting into motion the wheels to enable the supply that we already had in the US to start making these. So the speed that we were able to move at and to work with these other large corporations and leverage everyone's resources for what we already were good at was really, really a cool thing that COVID had actually enabled us to do. And that partnership would have never happened in the past. And if there was something like that was going to happen, it would have taken months or years to deal with, right? So this is something that's been really cool to see come out of COVID. And that speaks to how, by enabling our communities and our employees in corporations to think innovatively, and think about our products in that way, we can enable a response that is massively helpful.
Yeah. And, we obviously are not a medical device company or, in this kind of thing. We make 3D printers, but we were kind of able to leverage how we make 3D printers to kind of do some things that really quickly turn things around. So we have a world record holding print farm. So we have more 3D printers in our print farm than anywhere else in the world. And we use those to actually make the 3D printers that we sell. Well, we also have a section of that farm that we use for making like giveaways and things for booths and events. Well, there's no events going on. So we took that entire section of our farm and added onto it a little bit too. And we produced around 250,000 face shields that we gave away throughout the EU. And we were able to very rapidly bring that up, which now injection molding and kind of traditional manufacturing methods are starting to come online and catch on to these things. But we were able to very, very rapidly, because of the advantages of 3D printing and having a print farm like this and our knowledge of how to manufacture in that method, we were very quickly able to get up to speed while everything else started to catch up.
Awesome. So I wanted to shift gears just a little bit, because we were just talking about like external partnerships and how those were sort of fostered, not just with the maker community, but with other collaborative partners, other corporations. But, I think that COVID-19, in addition to transforming those relationships, also actually transformed your companies in different ways. And so I want to invite Toni and Chris to talk a little bit about some of the positive change I know that you've communicated to me that's happened at Accenture in this crisis, and what the crisis has done internally to change how you think about innovation. And I will say Accenture is already a leader in innovation, right? You already have innovation labs. You're already forward thinking as a company as it relates to innovation, but a lot of that has evolved, it seems. So I'd love to hear Chris or Toni talk a little bit about what you see happening.
Okay, and I think probably we both will, because I think we both have some collaborative things that have happened where we work together. I think we've both seen some different ways of positive change within the company as well. There really has been some silver lining outcomes from our work here during COVID, and as I'm sure is the case with other corporations. As I mentioned, our initiative caught Accenture leadership's attention pretty quickly, not only because of the speed with which we organized and were ready to deploy. I mean, literally 3 days after I posted the question, we were organized and ready to go, which is pretty amazing. So not only that, but also because the entire effort was being led by a leadership team made up of colleagues of many different career levels within the company. All of them actually below upper management level. And in fact, here I was leading the whole thing as an entry-level analyst. Those efforts were embraced and applauded by our leadership, as was our commitment to staying within legal guidelines, which of course, in this space comes up. We're talking about working with, the creation of medical things that have the potential even to be used for medical. At the same time, leadership recognized that in a company of Accenture's size, filled with innovative minds who were eager to help our communities, duplication of efforts were also likely, as were other great initiative ideas. What this resulted in was the creation of the Innovation Incubator that I mentioned earlier. That team, which I'm proud to also be a part of, developed a company-wide ideas website and encouraged colleagues to submit ideas on ways that Accenture could continue to respond to COVID, not only as volunteers, but also ways in which we could work for and with our clients and find ways to respond there as well. Examples of some of those submitted ideas, some of which are in progress or have come to fruition range from the development of a social distancing app. We were working with a client to develop a 3D printed reusable mask. I know there's an effort for temperature measurement through the use of thermal imaging cameras. Everything from that to a group working on VR grocery experience and utilizing available Accenture employees to support unemployment call centers in multiple states. That's been a really big need with the unfortunate loss of jobs throughout US because of COVID. Another positive has been the creation of a playbook to not only streamline the process of vetting these ideas, but also to find, as we said, the duplication of ideas, and then actually connect those teams to encourage collaboration. So not only is this a positive addition to Accenture during the crisis, during this specific crisis, but leadership has also decided to keep the innovation incubator as a permanent part of the company past COVID, to be activated as a response team for future crises. And of course, yet another positive outcome is the expansion of partnerships, like our partnership with Nation of Makers. The work we're doing here together will certainly birth other opportunities for collaborative innovation and ideas. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris, who I know will want to speak on that specific portion as well as some other positives in the company.
Yeah, thank you, Toni. I think you did a really great job getting to a good level of detail there in terms of what this has spawned, what this partnership has spawned inside of Accenture. Maybe I'll take more of a 30,000 foot view here, because Accenture is very future focused. We're always looking into the future. Every year we produce our Tech Vision report, which examines emerging trends in business and technology. We host innovation and future visioning workshops in our innovation hubs with leaders from different industries all the time. And when you talk about innovation, and makers, the only tomorrow, the only future that we really have is the one that we build as innovators. We have a lot of different types of innovation ecosystems. As I mentioned before, we have tons of partners. We're really plugged in with a lot of different folks in different industries. And, but for me personally, I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. I love this country. And I just can't tell you how proud I am of this American innovation ecosystem that's really just stepped up over the past several months. And I'm proud of the Grassroots initiative that Toni stood up inside of as a first year employee in a 400,000 plus person firm. And I'm proud of the maker community. If we didn't know what you can do before, we know what you can do now. Everyone in the chat, you've really, really shown us the power of our national innovation ecosystem. And I think the challenge moving forward, and this is really not even specific to the maker community, but how do we keep the momentum? How can we get corporations, government, private citizens, how can we work together even better, even more closely? We move fast, we need to move fast, but we need to maintain the ability to move fast together. So I really hope that this is the start of a much bigger trend, inside of Accenture, outside of Accenture, really with all of us. When you put all the capabilities that these corporations, large and small, bring to bear, you really have huge impact. So I just hope that we can work together, corporations, large and small, private citizens, donating their time, efforts, and expertise, and government partners to just get on the same page and move at the speed of, fast.
Thank you so much for that. So we do have an audience question. I think it's a really great one. So Charlie Lindahl actually wrote to us. He's a librarian and wrote a question, well, actually wrote a couple questions in there. One was, any relationships with libraries, but the question that I also want to ask is about the response in remote areas. And this becomes really important. His question was, how do we reach remote areas? Those are in rural or no internet connectivity connected places. He's located in Texas himself. And the rural areas really are a concern, right? Because we see that the COVID rates are high. But in addition to them being high in some cases, the hospital system and the healthcare systems that are in these remote areas are not enabled really to handle this kind of caseload. And so there is a lot more worry and stress about how remote areas are able to respond nimbly. And so we know that the maker communities in those areas may be taxed even a little bit more to help out. So I'm just curious, actually, I know some of your corporations have hubs that are in major cities, but others actually are spread out quite rurally. And actually, Audrey, I know you took off your microphone because I was going to actually reach out to you, as I know Stanley Black & Decker, actually, when you look at the map of locations for your manufacturing facilities, for example, they're all over the United States and in some cases in really rural areas. So I'd love to hear about what your corporations are doing in those areas.
Yeah, so you're right, Dorothy. We have, places where we're manufacturing and distributing our goods. We have a lot of fastener businesses that are in tiny little towns out in Indiana and Montana that you've never heard of, right? And what we've kept those facilities open this entire time, unless there was like a governmental regulation in that state that everything had to close. And what we've been able to do in those locations is not only leverage our supply chains for PPE for our employees, but we have been able to make sizable donations of PPE as well as just funds to our communities that our manufacturing centers are in. So yes, our headquarters are here in Baltimore and up in Connecticut, but we are very cognizant of our communities that support our manufacturing and our operations around the US. And what we've been able to do is give PPE donations to nursing homes and hospitals and the like that are in those communities. And that's totally just been empowered by the fact that we are a large corporation and we have this supply chain and these resources where we can, get our partners in China and get our partners overseas who do have access to these PPE and equipment, send them to us. We have the shipping and logistics that can handle it and then distribute them out into our communities. So even though we are, a large company, we are very aware of how we can make a difference in even those small rural communities, for sure.
Yeah, if I could jump in here to tag on that, Audrey, you had mentioned earlier how really what made the PPE effort, for example, and we do want to talk about the way that corporations can have an impact on community for emergency response or just in general, but for the PPE effort especially, there were so many groups that were jumping in and being able to help. And in the beginning, it was a little like everybody was trying to do everything and, everybody was really exhausted and having phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. Some of you were on those calls with me. But once we kind of started focusing on what we each did, like each of our core competencies, some of the organizations had lots of local people that could 3D print stuff or sew stuff, but they needed help with shipping and logistics. Matter Hackers, for example, we have shipping and shipping and logistics is our jam. We can do shipping labels and email them. We can organize the needs and have the makers send their stuff to us and we ship it out. Other places had other strong suits. So once we all really started to identify what we were already good at and then bring that to the table, it all kind of started getting a lot easier. Supporting, what corporations can do. I feel like there's kind of 3 things that we can bring to the table. Perspective, as far as where the problems are and where the problem solvers are. Access, our social media, our customer lists. We know all the people that can help, and a lot of our internal resources, just like all of you have said with Accenture and Prusa and with Stanley Black & Decker, we have experts internally. Like Matter Hackers, one of our executives came from Abbott. He's a medical device designer, like a medical device engineer, just so happened. So he was able to take a look at some of those early masks and be like, nope, I'm not going to tell 5,000 people to print that because I have that expertise and I am not confident that that's going to work. Visors, plastic visors where we can put sheets on it. Yes, that's a go button. And, then the NIH came in and, gave their approval on designs. And so that was really a great way for government organizations to kind of give overall thumbs up so that corporations and organizations could hit their go buttons and make sure that they were getting using the most effective technology to produce the most effective things. For masks, sewing fabric is the way to go. For visors, 3D printing plastic is the way to go. For swabs, using resins and Formlabs and carbon, they all got together and started their own coalition to really accelerate testing for swabs. The right tool for the right job, right? But what corporations can really bring to the table in any sort of emergency response is those three things: perspective of the problem and who can provide the solutions, access to those people, and then organization, and really making sure that everybody is bringing their strong suits to the table so that everything happens quickly and efficiently and safely.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we're coming up close to the end, but we did have another question as it relates. So let's see, I'm going to go back up here. So Rahini asked, most of corporate support seems to be targeted at students. How does it play out for adults and for public libraries? And I think we have a lot of library folks obviously joining us today. I did want to apologize. Charlie is not a librarian, not that that's not an amazing career option, but he instead works at Texas A&M not as a librarian, so I apologize for that error. But I guess I would love to get your feedback on what are some of the initiatives that you might be doing that relate to sort of adult support for making. And in particular, I think there is a value, of course, to libraries. And is there anything on the horizon? Are you working with libraries? Would you want to work with libraries? I think there's a lot of libraries that would be eager to work with you. So we'd love to hear your feedback on that. And I think that'll be our last question. So if you have anything else you want to throw in to your comments, now is the chance so that we're able to get that in before we have to end for our next panel.
I'll take a real quick thing on libraries. I'm actually, if you are a library or you have questions about making in libraries, please just email me. I'll put my personal email in the chat. We work with a ton of libraries, from everything from 3D printing pens for kids to full production capabilities for local businesses to be able to spin up their Etsy shops or their actual prototypes in the library. This week, there's actually a conference for the National Association of Community Colleges, and there's a lot of libraries within the community colleges that have been in that all week. And there's been a ton of ideas and different thoughts and projects that have brought forth, and specifically for libraries. So that's like super top of mind for me right now. I'm happy to talk to anybody about libraries.
Yeah, and we at Prusa are the same way. We are definitely interested in libraries. Education isn't a side that we have pushed a lot in the U.S. yet, largely because we are a non-U.S. company. But I am here. I am the U.S. employee for right now, trying to expand that. So libraries are definitely part of that goal. One of the things that we did specifically through COVID, though, is, I mentioned donating shields throughout Europe. We also, here in the U.S., we donated tons and tons of raw materials to local makers, largely adults, who are running groups of collaborative groups trying to make face shields. And so we made sure to get those resources in their hands, because one of the things that we saw very quickly was it started to be hard to get a hold of PETG, the plastic that we needed to be able to print these things. And so we have our own filament line. We made extra large spools outside the size that we normally make, and we boxed those up and sent them out to makers here in the U.S. And yeah, we want to continue supporting these efforts and making sure that things move forward. And my email will be in the chat also.
Thank you so much, Matt. Does anyone else have any sort of closing comments?
Yeah, I'll mention something, Dorothy. I mentioned a little bit in the chat, but I think that anyone that wants to be a maker deserves access to the tools and the knowledge to do it, whether you're remote, whether you're a kid, whether you're an adult. And I think that corporations can play a large part in enabling that access to a lot of people. And so, yes, we do definitely focus on, the future skills gaps that we see, but we also focus on, the current skills gaps. How can we get adults, returning citizens, or people who are in underprivileged communities, the skills that they need because they're here and they're ready and they're willing and they're able to. So leveraging that power that we have to get them the tools and the technology and the knowledge that they need is something that we're super passionate about. And my email's in the chat as well if anyone wants to reach out.
Thank you so much. Toni and Chris, do you have any parting thoughts before I wrap us up?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to just reiterate one of the great things I think that has come out of all of this is the recognition that, corporations have their bread and butter. They have what they do. But, there are things that a corporation in its bread and butter what they can't do. And that is where partnerships like this come into play and are such a fantastic part of response of a crisis response such as this. Just the growth of those partnerships, and then also just to recognize that innovation does not have to come from the top down. It can come from the bottom up. It can be a grassroots effort, and one of the beautiful things about the resources that corporations have is that they can get behind those ideas and help them come to fruition and really make a difference in our communities. I know one of Accenture's one of their big hashtags is being truly human. Integrating with communities and making a difference. They have the Social Innovators, which is a team dedicated to innovation within communities. The corporate citizenship practice that's within Accenture. These are all ways that Accenture strives to find the means to make our communities better. And I think that recognition of that's possible. Lots of corporations have similar things as well, and I think that the growth of those and the growth of these partnerships is a very positive outcome of the unfortunate pandemic, that it can showcase what we can all do together at every level.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll just add one thing to that. Toni, very well said. Just to kind of harp on what I mentioned earlier about really approaching this collectively as a society together. We look to the future, and I think we have a clearer picture of the future now through this disruptive event. And we see more agile, localized supply chains. We see advancements in material science, and I think a general, larger awareness now that these capabilities even exist. We also see other things in other domains, advancements in AI. There's a lot going on. And it's a tough problem in many ways, but it's one that we really have to figure out collectively as a society. So I just really hope to see, this coalition continue to operate together. Nation of Makers to continue doing great work. Everyone in the chats is keep doing what you're doing. Let's keep trying to get these large corporations, these smaller corporations, our government partners all together on the same page and operating at the same cadence. And that's going to best position us to leverage everything that innovation has to offer.
Thank you, Chris. That is a great way to wrap us up. And I just want to say, part of my hope in sharing this panel and these great panelists, and thank you all for joining us today, was to, emphasize that, a lot of times we think of corporations, and honestly, I think a lot of times we think of what can they give us, right? Like what dollars, what does the funding look like? Can they fund us to do X, Y, Z? And I think while funding is certainly pivotal and important, right, to get work done, there's so many other ways that we can work together and leverage the tools and resources that we have, the collective knowledge that we have, to what Chris just said, it's really going to take us all and the strengths that we each have. And it's not only dollars, right? It can be tools, it can be equipment, it can be support, it can be human capital. So there's just so many ways that companies bring their perspective. And again, it's a bunch of diverse perspectives we have that are going to solve these really challenging and diverse issues that we have as a country and as a world, right? So it will take all of us as this maker ecosystem to come together. And I just want to thank the corporations represented here. Thank you so much, Stanley Black & Decker. Thank you so much, Prusa. Thank you so much, Matter Hackers and Accenture for all that you're doing. Thank you to all the corporations who were not on this panel. There's so many that are supporting the maker ecosystem. We're just really grateful for your participation. And just thank you everyone for joining us here today. Our next panel that's coming up at 2 o'clock is on a different Zoom line. It's called Open Source Innovation at its Best, How Makers Across the US Came Together to Provide solutions in a global pandemic. It will be led by individuals from the Open Source Medical Supplies Group, which is a group of over 70,000 makers that came together to provide open source solutions. I really and highly encourage you to continue on with us today and hear what they have to say. And I've really enjoyed moderating this panel. I'll be back up at 4 o'clock in a different panel, Creating Communities for Change, Ensuring Equity and Inclusion in the Nation of Makers. But I hope to see you, and I hope you continue on today. Thank you again to our panelists, and have a wonderful rest of your day.